Hello everybody, welcome back to one of my Liz deep dives, this time also into 7 Days to Die. I wanted to talk about the sketchy thing that is our 7 Days to Die timeline. The reason why I wanted to do this is there used to be this fad about the lure dump. There was a lot of games out there that put lore into their game just to try and get themselves on game theory or something like that, hoping MatPat would analyze their game, make their game bigger because of the cool lore that was inside of it. Well, this game has been 7 Days, has been in development for so long, I don't think it now has a cohesive lore. These are the things that I have found, and I tried to analyze them to see if I could try and picture about when we were in the world's timeline, and here's why. I was talking about in my last video like this, my last Liz talk, I guess, I don't know, one of my Liz essays, whatever we want to call this series, I have no idea. Someone was pointing out that maybe the reason why we don't have clothes is because it has been long enough that regular clothes are threadbare, worn, and practically unusable. Somehow or another, this makes cohesive sense. Maybe if I put together all of the things that I know of the game, somehow I can make this make sense as far as a timeline goes. And anybody who's been following the channel for a long time knows that I have been actually trying to piece this together for the longest time. I was very excited when 1.0 came out and the bowling alley showed up, because that gave us a date. Well, it gave us a roundabout date. And I was trying to put together all of this information to get the timeline and realized there are some significant gaps within the game's storyline, the things that show up in the world, so much to the point where I actually pulled in AI to attempt to help me, and it's kind of confused too. But first let's go through the things that I found, and then we'll pull in the AI to see if maybe the AI has some sort of an idea that I don't have, or whatever, or maybe if it just completely didn't understand what I was talking about because we're talking games and not reality. So here is what I actually wrote down. It puzzled me on why in the world we don't have zombie survivors. And by zombie survivors, I don't necessarily mean people who were bitten and survived, which of course there is, because we have been, most of our characters have been bitten, slobbered on, I don't know what language I'm speaking, slobbered on. We've been infected and we have cured ourselves. So it's odd, first off, that there's a cure. Secondly, it's weird that we don't see people who have survived the initial apocalypse and gone on to turn into a zombie, which leads me to believe that the zombies only pass this on to, well, via slobber or bodily fluids or something like that, that it's not airborne. If it ever was airborne, it might have been airborne to start with. Maybe the initial flu was an airborne phase and it mutated and became non-airborne, which is the reason why death slowed down or stopped there after whatever the apocalypse was, because we don't see zombies walking around with backpacks, knapsacks, tents, guns slung over their sides, like they have survived the apocalypse for a while and then died and turned into a zombie walking around with the gear that they died with. Which to me is kind of an odd thing, but none of the designs for the zombies show that. The closest we've got is a soldier, which probably existed right at the time of the apocalypse. Or, more likely, when the flu pandemic was going on and the nuke was launched, that's when the zombie soldier was created. So no zombies created afterwards. All of them are pre whatever this is. They're all pre those. So I'm going to say maybe the zombie apocalypse isn't like The Walking Dead. We aren't all infected. So if we just die, we just die in the game, and that's it. There's no us walking around afterwards. Otherwise, you would figure that there would be a few, at least with a backpack or odd armor or something like that, that would not have existed before the apocalypse. It would have been something that existed after the apocalypse was created. However that is. Now, the bowling alley, I'll be showing pictures over here of all of the stuff that I have seen in the game as far as the assets go that verify some of the things that I'm looking for. First off, the bowling alley, when it shows up, it says on the side of it, the tournament for 2034 is canceled, meaning that the major apocalypse, whether it was considered the flu or the bombing, happened either early 2034 or 2033. So that would have been enough to cancel that stuff. There is also a regular calendar that exists in the game that has got 2034 on it as the year. There is one floating calendar that's a little bit of a pinup girl that's got 2013, which is kind of an odd year, but it also has significance in the game too. I just don't know what it means. And that is the pinup girl with the chainsaw and stuff, and I'll show a picture of her too, but she's 2013. Now there's plenty of assets in games where the date on the calendar do not coincide with the events. It's just something that someone kept up for decoration because they liked the picture. And as that picture typically shows up either in workrooms or working stiff areas or whatever, I'm going to assume that that one's just decoration. And that happens to be the year that everybody liked that character, whoever she was. So there's also something else that doesn't quite fit in with the storyline, and that is patents filed by Hugh. Now, we don't actually have full verification that that is indeed the Hugh that is now a trader. You would assume it is. He is he's a much older character than the rest of them. He looks gnarled, broken, scarred, the whole 9 yards. He is a very old character, but he did, in fact, have patents. Now, these particular posters you can typically find inside of his areas, but they are for post-apocalyptic weapons. One's a pistol and one's a rifle. And they were filed at 2 different times. One is December 26, 2012, and one is at February 10th, 2011. The rifle, for some reason, came first as a patent, but oddly enough, he received the patents on the exact same day in 2013. There's 2013 again. So I'm not sure exactly what was going on in 2011, 2012, and 2013, but obviously something big happened during those dates that caused him to want to patent this idea, but it wasn't so big that the patent office was down, and he didn't feel the need to not worry about patenting it. I would assume that means that he was probably a prepper pre-apocalypse, and maybe that there was some initial incident, possibly the flu starting in some other country. We don't have verification of the flu starting there, just that the newspapers, which I'll also show, they're very pixelated so you can't see very much, that Nevada, or Arizona rather, that Arizona was not hit first. They were afraid of it coming to Arizona, so there were other places where this started at, and maybe when this flu variant started, he saw the writing on the wall and patented these concepts. Now, why you would think that the world is going to end and why you would patent something, I'm not really sure, unless there was a reason for him patenting it to make sure he got some sort of money before the war or something like that. I don't quite understand his reasoning for it, other than there had to have been one on why he would patent it. So maybe the flu started then and it was smaller and maybe things were happening. And then, of course, you take in Higashi and the pharmaceutical company and the Karen, which I guess is probably either the daughter of the owner or one of the major lab technicians or whatever. But she also has a facility underneath her base, her house rather, where she is also experimenting. So if we guess, maybe the flu happened, the first sign of the flu, if we were to try and go by recent events on what this could potentially look like, the 2011, which is the first sign whenever he did the rifle, maybe that was the first whispers of whatever this disease was in some foreign land somewhere. Maybe overseas, maybe there was an essay written about this new variant someone was playing around with and it made him worry, and he started working on this design, thinking that maybe, just maybe, he needed to get this design out in the world enough to where people might be able to use it. So if we fast forward 23 years later, okay. So if it was 23 years later, I'm trying to do some math here. Okay, let me just speculate. I'm going to throw some things out there and you guys tell me what you think. If we were to speculate, maybe the first whisperings of this flu started in 2011, which is when he did his first patent. Well, he still continued from 2011 to 2012 to put out a second patent for a second weapon, something smaller, easier to carry. But he still didn't get his patent papers until 2013, and oddly enough, both patents came through at the exact same time. So I would guess that somewhere, somehow, somebody in some office thought, you know what, we probably should give him his patent, they make sense. Which means maybe there was a secondary trigger point. maybe it spread from the initial area. So if I was going to guess, first onset of this flu variant, whatever it was, happened in 2011 or thereabouts. His actual patent went in at 2011, so how long does it take for someone to design a gun? I don't know. Maybe it happened in 2010. So that would be the first flu onset wherever it happened. And then 2012, he's continuing to work on a weapon. 2013, I would say that maybe this is when it started to spread to other areas. Maybe it jumped from whatever where it was, and it, I don't know, either one of the creatures that it created made it onto a boat, or someone turned into one on a boat, or something like that, or maybe that's when it went airborne. I'm not really sure. Those are just speculations. But from then to 2034, there was also supposed to be a reaction on the part of the U.S. government, or I'm assuming it's the U.S. government. We've never been told that it was some other government that was in charge of the U.S. at the time, just that there was an airstrike of nuclear proportions against whatever this flu was. So at one point, the only reason the U.S. would go nuclear is if they thought that it was airborne. There would be no sense on if it was, actually, if it was airborne, they would probably be less reluctant. So maybe even then they knew it wasn't airborne because they thought they could stop it. But between 2011, 2012, and 2013, there was enough of a call of whatever this flu variant was, and enough of the transitioning that a company, a pharmaceutical company, presumably under the guise of either creating this biological weapon, having created the biological weapon, or completely innocently having been shipped these specimens or trying to find a cure for it. Now, maybe if we guess that this started somewhere else, and the facility where Higashi and stuff was located happened to be in this location, which is not necessarily saying that that doesn't work either, because it's saying that Arizona was not the only place hit. Arizona was just the next place. And it showed on the newspaper, which I'll show here, that the entire eastern seaboard had already been hit by this flu variant, and the response was happening. So they shipped it further out west, looking to find a cure before it completely took over the East Coast, and maybe by the shipment of it, brought it to the area. Either there was a release of it, or it just naturally migrated that way anyway. So there's that kind of timeline with the little bit that I've gotten, because we're still not 100% sure on whether or not Higashi was involved in the creation of it, or if they were involved in trying to fix it. They could have been on either side of it, and who knows, part of it could have been starting it, and the other part of it could have been finishing it. As in, maybe Higashi Pharmaceutical created it, and because of this pharmacy that is, not the pharmacy, but the lab that is underneath this house, maybe someone else who was in the company, the daughter perhaps, or whatever, brought it home trying to fix whatever Higashi had created. Those are my two thoughts. Now, as I said, there are some problems with these timelines, and there's a few of them that exist aside from just these, because the bowling incident and everything else like that. My issue with the food and the clothing, the books, and there's also another random one that I found on a menu that also makes it a little bit weirder to compensate how everything is working. Because we're talking about just 23 years here, from the very onset of possibly when the flu first shows up to possibly when the bombs dropped. And that's not including how far into the apocalypse our character is. This is just from possibly when the bombs dropped. So 23 years of apocalyptia happen. And then between when apocalypse happens and when our character wakes up, there's enough time that things happened. Some dude became in charge of this casino group, and some other person is in charge of, or group of people are in charge of this trading caravan thing that we're involved in. So, given the amount of time it takes for people to coordinate something like that, I would give it no less than 5 years. But, is it only 5 years? That's a very good question, because we could even be talking about way longer than that. I mean, what happens if we find out Hugh wasn't actually the one who filed the patents, it was actually his father? We don't know. So, here's some of the things that actually kind of mess with the timeline as far as I'm concerned. First off, the clothing situation that we now find ourselves in, because this poses a question every time there's a change to the game. It changes the lure of the game. For instance, when I first started the game, there was a dysentery chance on the food, and given what I know about food, given the fact that I also am a prepper, sort of, yes, I happen to know how long food will last in a can. I also know how long it will last in the can according to what people tell you and how long it will actually last in a can. So whenever it comes to things like the peas and carrots and the pears and the regular canned goods, that's like a 5 or 10 year can type of situation. Maybe. Tuna typically comes in like a pop-top can. Not always, but most of the time it comes in a pop-top can, which will last in a humid area maybe a year. We're talking about Arizona, so it might last longer. Around here, the lining that is around the pop-top cans actually rusts. So if you're going to store those types of cans, it's just better not to get those types. So you would have to use the ones that have a can opener. By the way, why don't we have can openers to open these things? Let's just use a knife, maybe. I would give or take 5 years on these. If you wanted to be very generous with most of the canned foods, you would have 5 or 10 years, which puts us, let's see, from the onset of the apocalypse to possibly 10 years after the apocalypse. That's 33 years that we're sitting at. Now, if you were to push that out as far as possible, the regular canned goods would have spoiled or gone bad, or there would be a very small chance of a dysentery after the 5 years. The rations, on the other hand, can last 25 years, 50 years, 25 years to be on the safe side. So rations are not necessarily what I'm looking at. But when I first started, all of the food had dysentery, including the rations, which made me think, okay, we're out 25 years from the apocalypse, which would put this at 48 years after the first onset of the flu, wherever it happened. That's a lot of years, okay? But they went back and took the dysentery chance back out of the food. Now we are back within the 5 to 10 range. At most, 5 or 10 year range from the last time that things were packaged and sent out that we are finding. So if we think the flu started in 2011, it got to the East Coast, I don't know, maybe around the 2013 range or the 2014 range, because that's when the patent office said, yes, let's go ahead and release it. It seems like they had a good reason for it. Maybe that's when it hit the East Coast. So maybe around there. I would say give it less than a year with a flu spreading around. Given what I know about recent events, things stopped within a year. So if we give that, say, 10 years, 20 years, and then after the apocalypse, the food would definitely be spoiled by now, if that's how it was. With the shutdown and everything else, it almost seems like once the bombs dropped, maybe there was a slight reprieve, and then things started breaking down again. I'm not sure. And I say that only because there's still the distinct lack of survivor zombies. You would figure if the bombs didn't work and zombies got out and they were transmitting this around, there would be people with backpacks, guns. The ones who survived the initial apocalypse would have gotten bitten and turned into zombies. And we don't have any stories, papers, or anything else like that saying that people have survived. It's just flu and then bombs. So I'm assuming that there's no inherent immunity to it. So that's not the case. The people who survived after the apocalypse were not just immune to it and it went everywhere and everybody caught it, and the ones who are alive now were just immune to it. It's entirely possible, but then why do you get another infection unless maybe it's like a tetanus infection? Maybe, because your character doesn't technically turn into a zombie, you just die. That's another question for later on, so we'll come back to that. This is timeline only. Those were the things that I had concerns about whenever it came to those, and I took all of this information after puzzling over it for a few hours and trying to get this in my mind about how this might work, and I threw it into Grok, which is the AI for this, and I asked it the question, and now I'm going to read to you guys what it said. I don't know what it has said. This is all the information. It's basically all of the stuff that I just read out to you, written as best as I could, where I think an AI might actually understand what it was I was talking about. I don't know. I don't use these things all that often, but let's see. Based on clues, wiki entries, which is kind of cool that it can actually pull the wiki entries, community analysis, and the zombie apocalypse in 7 Days to Die is rooted in a viral outbreak caused by a catastrophic nuclear, followed by a catastrophic nuclear response. The game's world, primarily set in the fictional Navezgane County in Arizona, features environmental storytelling through notes, papers, calendars, and other props. Those are limited. That's the reason for this. The core cause is the sepineural virus, also called epidural virus, or EDV, which I don't know where it got that. Is this an actual virus? Hang on. Bank Countries Wiki. The Republic of Nantucket is an island settlement founded in the mid to late 2034 after the epidural virus ravaged all of Europe and the entire world. It was founded by a bunch of refugees from ships recommissioned to U-boats that fled from Europe and landed on the coast of Nantucket, Massachusetts. You'll wind up on the dark web somewhere. According to this was 7 months ago. It was written in the fandom for the wiki. In the near future, the Third World leaves Earth in ruins. But the worst is yet to come. In the year 2013, nuclear attacks have decimated Earth and the remaining population is infected by an unknown virus. And this one is theorizing that the bombs happened first and then people got infected. Nobody knows for sure if it was radiation, the biochemical weapons, or an act of God, and it's assuming that that war caused people to get sick. Okay, well this is old. When was this written? And the reason why I say that this has to be old is because there's no way that the nuclear strike happened in 2013 and decimated Earth whenever there was supposed to be a bowling tournament in 2034, and calendars made in 2034. So this event line is wrong. Okay. Is there anything else? Okay, the only thing I can see is this is fully and completely the virus name given to this virus by 7 days. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that this wasn't something that had historical significance. Okay, it transforms humans into zombies. The virus ravages society, leading to desperate measures, and early access started in 2013. This is basically what the wiki said. But the problem is the construction of the timeline is messed up. Leading to desperate measures like nuclear strikes that escalated into World War III, the timeline is pieced together from elements, but some elements, like the exact date on props, shows inconsistencies, likely due to the game's long development history, early access starting in 2013, and involving lore. The character wakes up in a post-apocalyptic world with amnesia, leaving notes of key figures like the antagonistic Duke, a warlord demanding tribute from his casino base, and a helpful Noah, leader of the White River settlements. Pharmaceutical companies like Higashi Pharmaceuticals, implications that the virus was created or failed cure attempt, with evidence of genetic experimentation in hidden labs. Military efforts, including evacuations, bombings, failed to contain the spread. So, according to this, there is now a conflict within... Okay, I thought this was kind of weird, because I thought I had actually read that before. There's actually a conflict in its own lore now, with one saying the flu came first and one saying the bombs came first. So what does it think happened? Pre-apocalyptic inventions, which I did plug all of this information in. Patents filed for the apocalyptic-themed weapon, e.g. the rifle in February 11th and the pistol in 2012, both cleared in March 13th. These are associated with an older surviving character, likely Trader Recht, which is wrong. A grizzled trader in his 50s or 70s who deals in firearms. No, he doesn't. The places the apocalypse firmly after 2013, with the inventor surviving long enough to still be active in the game world. No direct conflict with later dates, but it highlights how pre-13 tech and culture persisted. Okay, that's wrong. I even told it his name was Hugh, but it does give credence on the age of the trader itself. I actually plugged this information in, which is like yet another reason why I do not trust the AI stuff. But the pre-apocalyptic themed weapons, why would, if it was the apocalypse, If the apocalypse hits tomorrow, you're not going to the patent office to try and patent a rifle. A patent exists so nobody else copies your design and uses it and sells it without your knowledge. You wouldn't do that post-apocalypse or knowing the apocalypse is coming. Virus development initial outbreak pre-2033, possibly earlier. Higashi Pharmaceuticals and possibly poppin' pills. Experiments with genetic engineering, potentially creating the SDV, EDV virus as a flu-like pathogen. It becomes airborne and spreads rapidly, mimicking a global pandemic. Newspapers and labs clue to a wide-spreading epidemic, which failed retrovirus cures distributed to the public. Now, also, it did not say whether or not there was actually a retroviral cure at all. This is not in the lore anywhere. If they were trying to, I don't think it ever went anywhere, unless that's the reason why there's poppin' pills trucks everywhere. I'm not sure. Virus ravages America by December 5th, 2033. The SDV, EDV has transformed much of the population into zombies. America's in chaos and the infection spread to neighboring areas like California. Military sets up roadblocks and checkpoints for containment. Yeah, but it's already taken over the East Coast, so I'm not sure if that's relevant either. Nuclear response in World War III. January 15th, 2034. Where are we getting January from? And December. In a last-ditch effort, nuclear weapons are dropped on major cities, including coastal seaports, to eradicate zombies and create buffer zone. This fails, mutating some zombies instead and triggering global nuclear warfare. Radiation creates nuclear fallout zones with bombshells and irradiated biomes visible in the game. Navezgane becomes sealed-off wasteland. Okay, according to this, there's 3 sources on why this happened in January. Is that actually listed in the newspaper? Can you see the date? Yeah, there's no clear dates on anything, just nuclear detonation, and it looks like fighting, and then I'll put this slightly bigger so you guys can see. It says the world sits in a new landmark. Report says U.S. healthcare on the verge of collapsing with no care in sight, with no cure in sight. Yeah, see there, they fear the Arizona will be next. So, in essence, it basically says it's already taken over the East Coast, according to the picture, anyway. And if it's on the verge of collapse, it's not just in Arizona. It didn't start in Arizona. That wouldn't make any sense. Anyway, let's go back to what the thing's suppositions. Societal collapse and faction formation, 2030 for where and onward. Law breaks down. Pharmaceutical research goes underground with Higashi's secret labs. Survivors form groups like Duke's extortion racket, Noah's White River settlements. Military sharing and evacuations leave behind clues like abandoned checkpoints, bowling alley ads canceling events. Implying the breakout halted plans mid-2034. Office calendars mark 2034 as last active year, while older 2013 pinup calendars linger as decorations, and the player awakening in the venture. Unknown, possible 2034. Maybe in the 2040s or 2070s, the character wakes up amid ruins, environmental decay, e.g. rotting clothes and scraps, suggesting 5 plus 40 years have passed, allowing fabrics to degrade while sturdier items like book remain intact. Preserved books, preserved foods like old shan sandwiches, a pre-apocalyptic Shamway product, are still scavenger, implying canned foods endure indefinitely. The surviving patent holder, age 50 to 70, aligns with 20 to 40 years elapsed since the 2013 patents. No exact date is given, emphasizing the survivor precise chronologically. Okay, addressing the in-game facts and inconsistencies. This is where I don't know if this is going to work out right, because there's already some stuff in the dates that I have concerns about. No zombie survivors and infections spread. This is actually not what I said. I said, why aren't people still turning into zombies, basically. It explains the absence of zombie survivors. No half-infected NPCs. Spread isn't explicitly detailed, but standard zombie mechanics implies bites and saliva as primary transmissions with initial airborne phase. We covered that. Bowling alley canceled, shows props cancellations. We covered that. If it's the nuclear strikes in 2034, no one would have hosted it in 2035. Minor date variances. That's assuming that they didn't cancel because of the flu. We all know all public spaces got canceled when the COVID went around. They would have canceled for the flu. They would not have waited for the bombs. So I think the bombs happened at 2035 or later. I don't think they waited. It just depends on how bad they allowed the flu to get. Office calendar 2035 versus the pinup. Sources consistently point to 2034 as the key for the year of the calendars, but your mention of 2035 should reflect the POIs or update variations. We've already covered that. Patents and surviving characters. It predates the apocalypse by 20 years, fitting the character. It's not wrecked. It's not wrecked. Your information is wrong. If he was in the 30s during the patent, he'd be 50 or 60 by the 2034s, or 70s if more time passed. The apocalyptic implication in names foreshadows the end times. They know direct lore confirms this is Rex, but aligns with traders' backstories, which is wrong because it actually has Hugh's name on it. The quick clearance, both in March 2013, might be bureaucratic flavor, not an inconsistency. How long does it take for a patent to go through? 18 to 36 months. The total time to get a patent issue can range from 1 to 5 years, depending on the complexity. Okay. So it could only take 1 to 5 years. That's still weird, though. Because it's 2 different patents and they both cleared on the exact same day in 2013. Anyway, let's just move on with that. I think I'm nitpicking. Obviously, I'm nitpicking. But anyway, the rotted clothing implies exposure to the elements over years. Fabrics degrade in 1 to 10 years outdoors, longer indoors. Papers, being paper-based and often sheltered, can last decades, including centuries if dry. This suggests 5 to 20 years post-2034, allowing partial decay without total destruction. It's a realistic touch in a survival game, not a timeline flaw. Okay, I will... 1 to 10 years. Okay, so if it's 5 to 20 years for clothing, that pushes us 5 to 10 years. Hold on, wait. Fabrics degrade in 1 to 10 years outdoors, longer indoors. What does that mean, indoors? Because the stuff we're finding is indoors. Obviously, then it's out by 10 years. The sandwich still existing. The old Sham sandwich was scavenged for item from Shamway, a parody of Spam and Hormel, described as really old, as sick and sickness-inducing. As a canned preserved food, it should survive indefinitely. A real-world Spam is consistent with a pre-apocalyptic menu, and in post-apocalyptic reinforces continuity. Survivals rate old stocks. This doesn't muddy the timeline, emphasizes scavenging from recent-ish collapse, not centuries ago. Okay, so they're theorizing, instead of you finding the whole sandwich as a sandwich, that you are the person putting together the sandwich. That's not actually how it's working, though. But our character is just calling something that they find a sham sandwich. So it's just some sort of random piece of possibly meat in between what looks possibly like bread, and they just gave it the name of what it was before. Yeah, I think you're jumping to conclusions and saying that this is actually okay. Makes me feel like maybe they were using AI to write the story. Okay, alright, anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll go back to saying the same thing I said before. As far as the clothing stuff goes, the clothing that is inside the stores and stuff like that should not have already broken down, depending on the timeline and depending on the books, because we find those everywhere, from garbage on the side of the road, full books, inside vehicles, full books, boxes that drop from the heavens, full books, all of that stuff. I'm not sure exactly when, but I stick to what I said before. If I was piecing this together, the flu would have started. This is just my theory. The initial onset of the flu in some other country other than the US, I say that only because if it started in the US, the reaction would have been faster. In 2011 is the first sign of the flu somewhere else in the world, and that's what triggered him to start his making of weapons. 2012 might be the first time it actually hit our country, and then in between, I think 2013 is probably whenever it took over its first major city. 2034, I think, is when it actually got bad enough for them to start dropping bombs. Maybe that's when it went airborne or something of the like. Something changed during that time period is probably when they actually dropped the bombs, is later 2034. And I say that only because it's not just the bombs that would have stopped them from doing that. It would have been if the virus got bad enough. So who knows? Maybe this could have been a flu that existed overseas, kind of like every now and then those of us that are in the US who have the privilege of being in an awesome country that does really good, great things. We hear about things that happen over in other countries, very bad diseases that exist that, thank God, at this point, let me knock on wood, have not come to the US exactly the way that we have heard them being elsewhere. Deadly diseases that kill hundreds of thousands of people. If something like that was to exist over there and it was of concern enough that, say, it's not just the sickness, the dead walk afterwards, this might have triggered Hugh to start the patents. Now, why he would have felt like this was patent worthy, maybe he thought that there was money to be made, that the US would be able to counter this. Given the fact that there's a huge pharmaceutical company with a big name that actually got the ability to try and fix the problem, denotes that they were probably very, very confident that they could beat it somehow or another. Whether they caused it or whether or not they had a good track record, whichever way it goes, they were confident, and he was confident that people would need a good, cheap way of defending themselves. That's the reason why he did the patent. But he kind of felt like the world was going to not only survive, but he would be able to make money, otherwise why patent? So if it happened overseas for a few years, enough time for him to get out 2 patents and wait for it to come back, whoever pushed it through in 2013, it's probably about the right time. Odd, though, that it came out at the exact same time for both of the ones that he put in a patent for. So maybe someone in the government knew something more about what was going on overseas somewhere. And I would say probably 2033 is when the flu hit the US. That makes a little bit more sense because I think they probably would have stopped the, I think they would have canceled the tournament for the flu. I don't think anybody would have gone back to the bowling alley to put canceled on the building knowing a bomb was going to be dropped. So that makes more sense to me. The actual bombs dropping had to have been in 2034 sometime. 2034, 2035, I think the actual pandemic swept and became significant in 2034. So, I'm going to go ahead and stop here because I have analyzed and I have asked an AI analyze, but I have not asked you guys. I would love to know what your theories are on this timeline. There are in-game stories that happen all the time, but as far as the years go and how long it's been since the apocalypse that our character now exists and their story is being told is still up for debate. How long after the bombs drop does our character wake up? However old our character is, were we there whenever the bombs dropped? Do our characters remember it? Was our character born in the apocalypse? Obviously, at some point or another, we crossed paths with the Duke at some point and got on the wrong side of him, so we've existed as an adult in this world long enough to have gotten to know the Duke, obviously, so we're not brand new to it. I would say possibly not out of a bunker. Kind of like the Fallout games, you don't just come out of a bunker. But then again, all those characters coming out of bunkers do tend to push people's buttons as well. So I would love to know what you guys think, given these timelines. I'm going to try and see if I can write up something to put it down in the description and maybe the first pinned comment to tell you guys what I think so that maybe you could see the timelines I'm thinking about. But I would love to know what your ideas on what you think this timeline is ultimately going to wind up being. And better question, is it actually going to be a timeline, and are we ever going to know what the real timeline was? Or is this something that's obscured, and is it obscured for legitimate reasons? Like, are we not told so that we don't ask any questions? Is our character not really knowing for a reason? Things like that. Things that keep you up at night. I'll see you guys next time. You have a wonderful day, or if not, and you stay shiny.